Well, howdy everyone, and let's get right into this. How does the Canon 50mm f1.2 USM L lens compare to its older, slightly slower brother, the 50mm f1.4 USM? The L lens is around 4 times the price of the 1.4, but it only lets in about 33% more light. Could it possibly be worth so much extra money? Let's see if the differences are enough. First of all, let's look at build quality. The f1.2 lens is big and heavy, but not too difficult to carry around with you, just a little heavy on your camera. It's weather sealed if you put a filter on it, and it has an extremely smooth focus ring, which rotates about 150 degrees, which is quite a long path, but just about right for precise focusing and video work. The whole thing feels very solid and sturdy in your hand. The f1.4 lens is a bit more functional, but there's nothing particularly wrong with its build quality. It's just not as nice as the L lens. It's a lot smaller and lighter, which is a nice bonus, but it doesn't feel anywhere near as hardy. I don't really like the focus ring so much on the f1.4 lens. It's not as smooth as the L lens, and it actually gets rougher to turn over time. It rotates a massive 200 degrees, so if you want to do a snappy focus pull during video work, then you have to turn and turn. Again, I prefer the L lens, but it's not that much of a bigger deal. The autofocus on both lenses works similarly. They're both quiet and fairly fast, although not exactly lightning quick. Overall, the L lens has the best build quality, unsurprisingly, by a decent margin, but the f1.4 lens isn't exactly bad. So let's take a look at the all-important picture quality. We'll start by looking at the quality on a full-frame camera, in this case a 20 megapixel Canon 6D. We'll start at f1.4, as that's the widest common aperture for both lenses. In the middle of the image, the lenses perform similarly, being reasonably sharp but with strong ghosting and heavy purple fringing. But I think the 1.2 lens has better contrast and looks noticeably cleaner. When we look in the edges, it's the other way round. The cheaper f1.4 lens is actually slightly sharper. That's interesting. This is the same when we stop the lenses down to f2, and even when we stop the lenses down to f5.6, the cheaper f1.4 lens is still slightly sharper. If we move down a little and look in the corners of the window frames, we can see that it even has slightly less chromatic aberration too. Back in the middle of the image, they're both as fantastic as each other. So, what can we say? There are a few major differences between the two lenses. On full-frame cameras, the f1.2 L lens is better in the middle of the image at wide apertures, which is quite a valuable attribute. But the cheaper f1.4 lens is noticeably sharper in the corners and has less chromatic aberration. Okay, so let's see how they both perform on an APS-C camera. In this case, my 18 megapixel Canon 6D. Most people use APS-C cameras because they're so much less expensive than full frame. At f1.4, the expensive Canon L lens performs better in the middle, with more sharpness and contrast, better pictures, and less ghosting. The f1.4 lens is basically looking weak. This continues in the corners, where the f1.2 roundly outperforms the f1.4, although neither of them are outright impressive. Stop down to f2, and the Canon L lens is still looking much nicer, with much more contrast than the f1.4 lens, although it also seems to have more chromatic aberration. This is the same at f2.8, and if we stop down to f5.6, then both lenses are as sharp as each other, although the f1.2 lens has a little more chromatic aberration, which is visible in the window frames. So, on APS-C cameras, the differences are stronger, and the 50mm f1.2 L lens finally outclasses its smaller brother in pretty much every way, except in levels of chromatic aberration. Sharpness isn't everything though. Let's take a look at distortion and vignetting on full-frame cameras. When both lenses are set to f1.4, we can see that the f1.2 L lens has slightly less vignetting or dark corners than its cheaper brother, but the f1.4 lens has slightly less barrel distortion. So neither lens does particularly well here. For the money you pay, there's no real improvement in the L lens. But here's something that's different. The expensive L lens handles out-of-focus backgrounds, or bokeh, better than the f1.4 lens. Both these pictures were taken at f1.4, and maybe you can see that the bokeh is smoother on the f1.2 lens, in the picture on the left. That's good news. Just out of curiosity, let's open up the L lens to f1.2. As you can see, the difference with f1.2 isn't really that great. You really are only getting a slight increase in blurriness. Every little helps, but you'd hope the difference might be a little more impressive. Here's another example, because bokeh is so important. Here's a picture from both lenses at f1.4. On both lenses there's some green highlighting in the bokeh, but the smoothness from the f1.2 lens made the 1.4's bokeh look a little harsh. If we stop the L lens down to f1.2, again we can see that there's not a huge amount of extra blurriness, but it is there. As you can see in this video footage, the f1.2 L lens handles working against bright lights a lot better than the f1.4 lens. Maybe that's why it generally has better contrast. Okay, so let's wrap it up. Generally, the lenses perform very similarly, but the f1.2 lens has better build quality, better contrast, and better image quality on APS-C cameras. It also has nicer bokeh and works better against bright light. The only real advantages of the f1.4 lens are sharper corners on full-frame cameras and a bit less chromatic aberration. But it's only a quarter of the price, and it can do almost everything the f1.2 lens can do. f1.2 really is only 33% faster than f1.4. I tested that carefully, so the difference definitely isn't big. The Canon L lens is certainly very nice, but while it's 4 times the price of the older f1.4 lens, it's certainly not 4 times as good. The f1.4 lens is good value for money, whereas there's a hint of the Emperor's new clothes about the f1.2 lens. Professionals will prefer it if they need the absolute best, but everyone can be happy with the f1.4 lens. It's up to you to decide.